So, Anthony, welcome to the Adrenaline Zone. And we like to start out by asking our guests a little bit about their background. So, can you give us some insight into how you got into the intelligence business in the first place?
Thanks so much for having me. And I started out like a lot of people in my generation. 9/11 happened when I was in my 20s, and I knew that I wanted to serve. My father was a Marine. My brother had served as a Marine, and I knew that it was time. It was my turn. And so I signed up. And a lot of people think this is weird, but I applied on a website. And that's how I became an intelligence officer.
Really?
And so that, and I had some friends who were in the business and told me how to get in. But ultimately, you got to apply on the website, and got myself, you get selected. You have to get a security clearance. It took a while. And then next thing I knew, I was being sent to training at the farm. And then a little while after that, ended up in Iraq.
So just a real brief follow-up. We'll talk about your book here in a second, but one of the points you make in your book is, hey, we all have to be intelligence officers. Didn't know you could apply on a website. Very, very cool. So,
Well, I have to ask, was it USA Jobs, since it's a civil servant position, or they have their own website?
I went to the agency website. That's how.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, all of the agencies have their own website, which is, and you can apply on all of them. As far as I know, this was a long time ago when I applied, about 20 years now, but I bet it's still similar.
So funny. You want to be a spy? Find the website.
who knew? Who knew?
So you were also a case officer, as we just discussed. You said you went to the farm, you had training, became a case officer. So for our audience, can you let everybody know what that means? And then what did you do there, just briefly?
Yeah, case officer is what a lot of people imagine an intelligence officer does. And it's the person in the intelligence world who collects human intelligence. So we're taught to spot, assess, recruit, and handle sources. So you learn how to securely do all of that. You learn how to go out and find someone who has information that's important to the U.S. government. Sometimes you have to do things like go meet them somewhere. Maybe you have to bump them, as they say, in a coffee shop or something. And you assess their placement and access. Do they know some secrets that we'd be interested in finding out, for example? Maybe they work in a government agency, or maybe they work in another country that we want to find information out about. And then you learn how to recruit that person. So how to convince them to do something very hard, which is often in their country considered treason. And so as you can imagine, it's a delicate kind of operation, and then you have to handle them securely because their country or other people in the world may not want them doing this. And so you have to go out and do this in a very, very secure way. We take it extremely seriously. I think that's something that you don't see in the movies, really, how important sources are and how seriously case officers take it when we handle them, because their safety in some weird way is almost more important than yours, because they may have access that can literally be the difference between war and not going to war. And so that can be very important. You got to keep this person safe, and you got to handle them sometimes in difficult situations.
And when you actually lose one, it's really devastating for the case officers. And every time I go to the Spy Museum, which I did, I think, last week and gave a talk there, I go by the Tolkachev exhibit. This guy was one of the best spies we ever had in Russia. And of course, he was compromised, unfortunately. But you were not only with the agency, but you spent a good time in geospatial intelligence. So tell our listeners, what on earth is geospatial intelligence? And you were subsequently recruited to kind of modernize it. So talk to us a little bit about that, Anthony.
When I was a case officer, I used geospatial intelligence, and that is intelligence that involves imagery. So think about pictures taken by satellites, for example, or by drones. And it involves geospatial information, which is information at a point in time. So I like to explain it as, when you go on Google Maps and you see all of that data on there and the locations of things or reviews of a restaurant, that's geospatial intelligence, actually. But we, of course, would use it for different things in intelligence, right? And so when I was a case officer, for example, maybe I was planning an operation and I would want to know what was going on around that part of Baghdad, for example. And a geospatial analyst could give me that. They could show me the imagery. They could show me what roads were open or not. They could even do things like show me where it might be possible to be shot by a sniper, which, trust me, when you're out there in the middle of a war zone is a pretty scary thing. So these people were extremely important, and it was a privilege to work with them. And so I had left the intelligence community, worked at a company, actually started a tech company and sold that company. After I sold my company, I was looking to serve again. I actually thought I was going to be an advisor, and I was invited to be an advisor at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency by Robert Cardillo, who was the director then, and Sue Gordon, who was the deputy director. And they were looking for somebody who knew intelligence, but also knew about tech. And at that time, there weren't that many people who kind of had clearances and knew about intelligence and had been in the tech startup world. And they knew they needed that expertise. So they invited me on to their advisory board. And when I got on that board, I took it extremely seriously. And I came up with a whole strategy for what they should do, how the agency should adopt artificial intelligence. And of course, they looked at that and they called my bluff. And they said, hey, why don't you come in and you do this? And I thought it. So, watch out what you wish for and what you do.
Put your money where your mouth is. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So, but I knew that I wanted to get back in the mission, and I missed it. And I accepted that job immediately and went back in to help Robert and to help Sue modernize the agency.
Wow. Amazing.
That's a hard job to modernize a bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah. Sandra just came off of doing that in a different world, but and I have plenty of experience with that myself. Yeah. So with all this incredible knowledge you gained, both as a case officer, as a technologist, starting a company, and then coming back into geo, you formed some pretty strong opinions about the world that's changing. And you have recently published a book that is literally hot off the press, The Fourth Intelligence Revolution. The thesis, which is obvious from the title, is that the world has changed. The intelligence community needs to change along with it. So let's start with, in your view, what's driving this needed revolution in intelligence? What's going on?
Backing up, when I joined the intelligence community, it was the war on terror. And we were fighting two wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that was one type of intelligence. And that's the one I sort of knew. And when I came back into intelligence and I went into NGA, I saw a new form of intelligence forming. And that was one that was marked by artificial intelligence and many other things that maybe we can get into. And what was driving it were two things. One was this conflict with China and this competition. And that, it's not that was new. In some ways, there had been tensions with China before that. But around 2017 or so, which is the time I was at NGA, we were really starting to comprehend as a country that this is the next big competitor. And we were going to be in some form of competition. We didn't even know what to call it then. Some people talked about Cold War 2.0 and things like that, but we knew something was happening, and that was about to drive a lot of changes in intelligence. The other thing that was happening, and really one of the big reasons I went back into intelligence and served at NGA, was that technology was about to change everything about intelligence, and specifically artificial intelligence. So at NGA, we realized what's called computer vision, which is kind of AI that allows you to understand what's in an image and see what's changed in it, would change everything about our business fundamentally. Just like we're all seeing today, how ChatGPT and that kind of AI is changing everything. We saw it in intelligence. So those two factors, China and AI, have led to this fourth intelligence revolution.
You mentioned China as our most important threat and as an emerging threat. How is that being manifested? And what are the most important elements of that threat? Because you hear backroom discussions or, sort of small things in the media, but I think there's just the tip of the iceberg of what's really going on.
Well, there's the military threat to start, which is really China's the only other country, save for possibly Russia, that presents an actual existential threat to America, where using their nuclear weapons and military equipment, they could very seriously harm the United States or our interests. But really what I focused on in the book is the intelligence threat. And China is an authoritarian nation, and authoritarian nations spy on their own people because they want to know what those people are doing, and they want to use that information to control their people. So they have built up what might be the greatest intelligence function in the history of humankind. They have built up an ability to spy on their entire population. 1.4 billion people are monitored every day, even every second in some ways, where they can see what they're doing on the internet, they can see what they're doing on cameras and so forth. And my belief is that China wishes to extend that surveillance dystopia to the rest of the world, including to America. And so a lot of us see these announcements on the news, where they say, oh, there was a Chinese hack on the telecom system or on a healthcare system or on a bank, and they stole some data. That's what's happening there. They're stealing information about Americans, and ultimately they want to use that not only to spy on Americans, but I believe ultimately to try to influence us and maybe even control us over time.
Your prologue to your book is fascinating. It really does a nice job of weaving a lot of this together. Maybe not so much the China piece, but it talks about a drone attack in Ukraine and how the many different types of ints can feed into that. Do you want to sort of walk us through, because there's a lot of synergy among these different vulnerabilities that we've created?
The prologue of the book tries to show how all the pieces fit together in intelligence, and how there are all these different places and all these different types of sensors that are now collecting intelligence, which I think a lot of people don't realize. So there are satellites in space taking pictures all the time. Not just visual pictures, for example. Some of them take what's called SAR, or synthetic aperture radar pictures, which can actually see through things. They can see through, leaves and so forth. They can see through clouds. And those satellites aren't just, giant government-owned satellites anymore. Some of them are commercial. Some of them are owned by companies, and actually don't even cost that much. And they're designed by 27-year-old, kids in Colorado or something, which is amazing to think about. So that kind of imagery is being used in Ukraine as we speak. And there's lots of other types of intelligence people don't think about. There's things like electronic warfare that's being used, where the signals from everything are just being collected by sensors, everything that moves on a battlefield. Drones are collecting imagery. Those are think of those as the sensors and devices out there collecting it. Then there's this whole world of online intelligence where everything you do is being collected on and it's being influenced. And so what I talk about in that prologue is how, sometimes what happens is an image of, say, the battlefield is released online, but then it could be changed. It could be literally that image can be changed to make it look like the opposite. Maybe it was an image of a Ukrainian tank being blown up, but someone changes it to make it look like a Russian tank was blown up, or vice versa. And that gets into this world of where spying is not just about seeing what's happening in the world. It's about what you think in your mind and how you take information, and how intelligence like that can be used to change or influence your thoughts.